Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of Hippocrates and the fascinating origins of Western medicine.
It's really amazing how relevant these ancient ideas still are.
Yeah, for sure. So much of what we take for granted in healthcare today traces back to those early thinkers.
Absolutely, like the whole idea of medical ethics, that really started with them.
Right, and then there's the focus on observation, really looking at the patient. And that was huge GE back then, because most people attributed illness to supernatural causes. But Hippocrates, he took a different approach.
Right. Instead of blaming it on the gods or demons, he looked for natural explanations.
Exactly. So let's talk about this Hippocrates guy. He's often called the father of medicine, but it's not even totally clear if he was one person, right?
Yeah, there's actually quite a bit of debate about that. Some scholars believe Hippocrates might have been a group of physicians who shared similar ideas, not just one individual.
So it's like a medical mystery almost.
Oh.
A shadowy figure who might not have even existed.
Haha, yeah, kind of. I mean, we have this collection of texts, the Hippocratic Corpus, with over 70 medical writings attributed to him. But figuring out who wrote what is a real challenge.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle from centuries ago.
Exactly. But regardless of the authorship, those texts had a huge GE impact. They established a whole way of thinking about medicine.
So when we talk about Hippocratic medicine, we're referring to the ideas and practices found in those texts, right?
Exactly. It's a whole system of medicine, a philosophy of healing.
Okay, so let's get into some of those ideas. You
Ooh.
mentioned their understanding of diseases was revolutionary for its time. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, they believed that disease came from imbalances within the body itself. It was like a disruption of the natural order.
Instead of like a punishment from the gods.
Exactly. They shifted the focus from the supernatural to the natural world.
That's such a huge leap forward.
It really was. And they stressed the importance of careful observation,
Yeah.
looking at the patient's symptoms, their lifestyle, everything.
They were like medical detectives gathering clues.
That's a great way to put it. They were really laying the groundwork for the scientific method centuries before it became, a formal thing.
Fascinating. So this emphasis on observation, on really seeing the patient as a whole, that seems connected to another key element of Hippocratic medicine, the famous oath.
Right, the Hippocratic Oath. That's a really interesting document. It's often seen as like a universal code of ethics for doctors, but it was probably more of a contract between a teacher and their students.
So it was about upholding a specific tradition of medicine.
Yeah, it was about passing down knowledge and ensuring the integrity of the craft.
But even if its original scope was narrower, the oath's core values have really resonated throughout history, haven't they?
Absolutely. Treating patients to the best of your ability, keeping their information confidential, avoiding harm. Those are still foundational principles in medical ethics today.
And they even dealt with more complex dilemmas, like their stance against euthanasia and abortion. It shows how deeply philosophical their approach to medicine was.
Totally. It wasn't just about treating the body, it was about respecting life and understanding the role of the physician.
So, to really grasp those ethical principles in action, we have to delve into their view of the human body. And that leads us to one of their most well-known, maybe even misunderstood, concepts. The four humors.
Ah, the four humors. This is where things get really interesting.
I have to admit, when I first heard about them, it sounded a little out there, like something out of a medieval magic show. But I'm guessing there's more to it than meets the eye.
Oh, for sure. To understand the four humors, you have to think like an ancient Greek philosopher. They saw the world made up of four basic elements: earth, air, fire, and water.
And they believed these elements weren't just like abstract concepts, but actual forces that shaped everything.
Exactly. And each element had its own qualities: hot, cold, wet, dry. So the four humors in the body mirrored this elemental system. Each humor corresponded to an element and had its own specific qualities. Blood was warm and moist like air. Phlegm was cold and moist like water.
Okay, I'm starting to see the connections here.
Right. And they believed that keeping these humors in balance was key to good health.
So what happened when that balance was disrupted?
That's when disease happened. They called this imbalance dyscrasia. If one humor became too dominant, it would throw the whole system off and lead to illness.
So these weren't just random fluids in your body. They were seen as vital forces, each with its own personality.
Yeah, and they really believed that these humors influenced both your physical and mental well-being.
Like an imbalance could affect your mood and temperament, not just your physical health.
Exactly. They understood the connection between mind and body long before modern medicine caught up.
Wow. That's pretty forward-thinking for their time. But how do they figure out the balance of humors in a patient? Did they have any special tools?
They relied heavily on their senses. They would observe the patient's complexion, pulse, breath, even the color of their urine.
So it was a very hands-on, detective-like approach?
Definitely. And this emphasis on observation was crucial for their treatments, too. If they determined that a certain humor was out of balance, they would try to restore that balance.
So what kind of treatments did they use? I've heard about bloodletting. Was that common?
It was. Bloodletting was seen as a way to remove excess humors, especially blood, which they thought was overly abundant in some conditions. They also used diet, recommending foods they believed could counteract specific humors.
Like a cooling food for someone with too much heat.
Exactly. The theory of humors really permeated every aspect of their medical practice.
It's incredible how this ancient theory shaped their whole understanding of the human body. But of course, today we know that the humoral theory isn't scientifically accurate.
Right. But what's interesting is that some of those ancient practices based on this theory are making a comeback, like cupping and leech therapy.
Really, those sound a bit out there compared to some of the other ideas we've been discussing.
I know, right? But stay tuned, because we'll be diving deeper into those in the next part of our deep dive. So those four humors, fascinating as they are, aren't the whole story.
Right. Hippocrates' influence goes way beyond that.
It really does. What always gets me is how much of modern medicine is rooted in those core Hippocratic principles.
You mean observation, ethics, that patient-physician relationship?
Exactly. They're like the foundation of good healthcare, even today.
It's amazing how these ideas from so long ago can still be so relevant.
I know. Like, take observation, for example. We have all this incredible technology now, imaging, blood tests, but medicine still starts with looking at the patient.
Asking questions, getting their history.
Exactly. What are their symptoms? What's their lifestyle like? All those details matter.
It's like that saying, listen to your patient, they're telling you the diagnosis.
That's so true. And Hippocrates was already emphasizing that centuries ago.
They didn't have all the fancy tools we have, so they had to rely on their senses.
Right. They used their eyes, ears, hands to gather information about the patient.
It was all about really paying attention.
And that attentiveness is still crucial for any doctor.
You have to see the whole person, not just a disease.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the Hippocratic Oath and its focus on ethics.
It's more than just rules, though, right?
Absolutely. It's about building trust with the patient, making them feel heard and understood.
That human connection is something technology can't replace.
Couldn't agree more. A good physician treats the whole person, not just a disease.
And that patient-centered approach is something Hippocrates really championed.
Long before anyone else. And we're actually seeing a resurgence of that holistic approach in modern medicine.
Like with integrative medicine, lifestyle medicine.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that mind, body, and environment are all connected.
Just like Hippocrates thought all those centuries ago. It's fascinating how those ancient ideas keep coming back around.
It really is. But I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, those practices like cupping and leech therapy.
Oh yeah, those definitely sound a bit more out there.
They do, don't they? But they're actually rooted in the humoral theory, that idea of balancing those bodily fluids.
I know we said the humoral theory itself isn't accurate, but you're saying some of those practices are making a comeback.
It might surprise you, but yeah, some of them are finding new applications in modern medicine.
Really? I thought that was all just alternative medicine stuff.
We'll take leeches, for instance. Believe it or not, they're FDA approved for medical use.
Wait, seriously? Leeches in hospitals?
Yep. Mostly they're used to improve blood flow, like in reattached limbs or skin grafts.
So there's actually a scientific reason for using them.
There is. They secrete a substance that prevents clotting, which can be really helpful in those cases.
Wow, I had no idea. So it's not just some ancient superstition.
Nope, there's real science behind it. And cupping, though it's maybe a little more controversial, is also being investigated for its potential benefits.
Like for pain relief, I've heard athletes use it.
Exactly. It's amazing to see those ancient practices finding new life in modern medicine.
It really shows that we should always be open to reevaluating our approaches.
Absolutely. What might have been dismissed in the past could turn out to be valuable.
It's all about that constant learning and discovery.
That's what Hippocrates was all about. He challenged the assumptions of his time.
He focused on observation and experience, not just superstition.
And that really paved the way for modern medicine.
Every breakthrough, every new treatment builds on that foundation.
It's a legacy that reminds us medicine is a journey, not a destination.
There's always more to learn, more to discover.
Absolutely. And that's something we should all keep in mind as we continue exploring the fascinating world of medicine.
Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Hippocrates, I'm still kind of hung up on those ancient practices you mentioned.
You mean cupping and leech therapy? Yeah, those definitely seem a bit out there.
Yeah, like a little too medieval for modern medicine.
Huh, I get it. It does seem a little strange at first glance. But remember, they come from that humoral theory we talked about.
Right, the idea of balancing the four humors. But even if the theory itself is outdated, I've heard some of these practices are actually being used in hospitals today.
It's true. It might sound surprising, but certain ancient remedies are finding new life in modern medical settings.
Really? Like which ones?
Well, for example, take leeches.
Leeches, seriously. As in those blood-sucking creatures.
The very same. But they're not just some random creepy crawly. Leeches are actually FDA approved for medical use these days.
Wow, that's wild. I never would guess that. What are they used for?
Primarily to improve blood flow in specific situations, like reattached limbs or skin grafts. Turns out, they secrete a substance that prevents clotting, which is crucial for healing in those cases.
So there's an actual scientific basis for using them.
Yep. It's not just some ancient superstition, there's real science behind it. And then there's cupping.
Okay. Yeah, cupping, I've heard about that one too. I think I've even seen some athletes using it.
Right, it's becoming increasingly popular, especially for pain relief and muscle recovery, though it's still a bit more controversial than leeches.
So I guess what we're seeing is that what might have been dismissed as outdated in the past could actually be valuable.
That's the beauty of science and medicine. It's always evolving. We're constantly learning and reevaluating our approaches.
And that brings us back to that key Hippocratic principle, right? The importance of questioning, observing, and never stopping learning.
Absolutely. Hippocrates was all about challenging the status quo and seeking new knowledge. He really embodied that spirit of inquiry.
And that spirit is just as important today as it was back then.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from our deep dive into the world of Hippocrates.
It's a legacy that should inspire us all, not just those in the medical field.
Exactly. We should all strive to approach life with that same curiosity and dedication to learning.
Well, on that note, it seems like we've reached the end of our journey back to ancient Greece. We've explored the fascinating world of Hippocrates, those four humors, and even pondered what he might think of modern medicine.
It's been quite a journey. From those early theories of disease to the lasting impact of the Hippocratic Oath, we've seen how those ancient ideas continue to shape healthcare today.
It's incredible to think about how much we owe to those early thinkers. But this is just the beginning, right? There's always more to learn, more to discover.
Absolutely. And we encourage you to continue exploring on your own, keep asking questions, keep digging deeper, and never lose that spark of curiosity.
So to our listeners, we leave you with this. What will you uncover next on your own deep dive into the world of medicine? Keep that Hippocratic spirit alive and happy exploring.